Today's lesson was about adding decimal numbers, and the big challenge for, adding and subtracting decimal numbers, and the big challenge for that is that you have to line up the decimal points, and you need to make sure you don't forget that. Now sometimes you add a whole number with a decimal number, and what you would do is figure out where the decimal point for the whole number is and then line them up. You would not line it up like this. Here's how you would line it up. I would put the 2.87 here, and this would be 70.00. And here they are lined up. Any whole number has an implied decimal after it. You can just put a decimal right here and as many zeros as you want after that. And then underneath that is 1.302. And I'm going to line up that decimal also. So all the decimals are lined up in this number. Now I have a couple of spaces here. I can just fill those with zeros. Now it looks a little less weird and it's easier to deal with. So I'm going to add these together. 2 plus 0 is 2. 7 plus 0 is 7. 8 plus 3 is 11. 2 plus 1 is 4. And 7 plus nothing is 7. Now my answer is not 74,172. I have to put my decimal in my answer, and it's right underneath the decimals that are lined up in my problem. The decimal goes right here. So same thing with subtraction. If I have a whole number and a decimal number, I need to line up the decimals, and there's an implied decimal after the whole number, so I can just put it right after the whole number. And I'm going to do that. 988.000 and 12.812, and I can line up the decimals like that. Now I'm subtracting, so of course the bigger number goes on top. We're not doing negative numbers yet. I'm going to put the decimal first this time. The decimal goes right under the decimals of my problem, and then I just do all the subtraction around it, and the decimal will magically go into the right place in my answer. So now we have to borrow. Borrowing over a bunch of zeros can be a little bit challenging, so let me actually make this a little bigger so I have room for all the stuff we're going to do. There we go. So I'm going to subtract these. I can't take 2 from 0, so I borrow from the next column. I can't borrow from the 0, so I borrow from the next column. I can't borrow from that 0, so I borrow from the 8. That becomes a 7. Now all the zeros on the way back turn into 9s. They don't turn into 10s. Only the last one turns into a 10. Here we go. 10 minus 2 is 8. Put my decimal there. 9 minus 1 is 8. 9 minus 8 is 1. 7 minus 2 is 5. 8 minus 1 is 7. 9 minus nothing is 9. So I did my subtraction, and everything was lined up perfectly. So here are a couple of examples from the book. The first one is a subtraction problem, and everything is lined up nicely for us. I can't take 5 from 4, so I borrow from the 0. I can't borrow from the 0, so I borrow from the 7. This becomes a 6. This becomes a 9. And this one becomes a 14. I borrowed that from the 6 there. 14 minus 5 is 9. 9 minus 2 is 7. 6 minus 3 is 3. And there's a decimal there, and 3 minus 1 is 2, so it's 2.379. Now we're going to add these two. Now here they didn't tell us, they didn't line it up nicely for us, so I'm just going to do that. 21.54, and I put the second number under it, but the 4 is going to go right here because that's what lines up the decimals. And then I have numbers that don't completely line up. Some people make the mistake of shoving this to the left. 1, so everything lines up, but that's not how it works. We only line up the decimals, even if it looks weird like this. So you can fill this space with a 0. Don't have to put anything up here. You could if you wanted, but it would make a difference. So I'm adding these together. And with the decimal here, 8 plus 0 is 8. 4 plus 5 is 9. 5 plus 7 is 12. 4 plus 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6, and 2 plus nothing is 2. So I get 26 and 298 thousandths. So there are some problems on your homework which involve patterns. And I'm going to do a couple of examples of those. So here we have a pattern that starts at 2.1, then goes to 3.3, 4.5, 5.7, and then there's a blank. We have to figure out what that is. Then 8.1, and then a blank. So first thing I notice about this is the numbers are getting bigger. And I know that one math operation that makes things bigger is addition. So I try to figure out, well, what can I add to 2.1 to get 3.3? Well, there's a quick way of finding that out. Just subtract them. See what the difference is. 3.3 minus 2.1 is 1.2. So I think that I'm adding 1.2 to each term to get the next term. So under description, I'm going to say plus 1.2, but I'm still going to test it just in case. So 3.3 is my next number, and in theory, if I add 1.2 to it, if I add 1.2 to it, I should get the next number, which is 4.5. And I do get 4.5. So everything looks good so far. I found my pattern. Now I need to figure out what goes in these spaces. If I start with 5.7, I need to figure out what happens next. 5.7 plus 1.2 is 6.9. So 6.9 goes into this space. Now let's test it. Let's see if our pattern gives us 8.1 next. If so, then I know that I did it right. Ooh, that's not what I meant to write. Oops. Plus 2.1, 1.2, oh good grief, there we go, 1.2, 9 plus 2 is 11, 6 plus 1 is 7, plus 1 is 8, and I get 8.1. So it looks like my pattern, my description is correct. So then I take 8.1, and I add 1.2, and I get 9.3, so that's my last one. Okay. Next example, we have 4.05 goes to 4 goes to 3.95, and so on. I notice they're getting smaller, but by how much? Let me subtract the first two and see what the difference between them is. 4.05 minus 4.00 gives me 0.05. Okay, so I think my pattern is going down by 0.05, and since it's getting smaller, it's minus. It's minus. So I'm going to test it. I'm going to start with 4.00, and I'm going to subtract 0.05. You know, a lot of people in class, they saw the pattern right away, but they didn't write it down properly. They wrote down 5 or 5/10 because I saw the 5 here, but it's actually 5/100. So in order to get that pattern, you just want to subtract the first two terms like we did up here, and then determine which direction it's going in. It's getting smaller here, so it's negative, getting bigger here, so it's positive. So I'm going to test out my findings, see if I'm correct. So I have to borrow. I can't take 5 from 0, so borrow from the 4. This becomes a 9. This becomes a 10. 10 minus 5 is 5. 9 minus 0 is 9. 3 minus 0 is 3. 3.95 is indeed my next number. So let's find out what's after that. I will subtract 0.05, and I get 3.90. Let me test, make sure I got the right answer by subtracting another 0.05. And I borrow from the 9, I get an 8. 5 minus 10 is 5, 8 minus 0 is 8, 3 minus nothing is 3, and I do get 3.85. And my final blank here, 3.85 minus 0.05 is 3.80. Now, one last thing. Some people had some trouble with number 13 on the homework, so I'm gonna give you some hints. Now, it's telling you here the sum of two numbers is 5.0. Sum of two numbers is 5.036. That means I'm adding two numbers together to get 5.036. Now let me just put blanks here where those numbers should be for every place value. And then, so that's the second number, and here's the first number. Then I'm going to fill this in with clues that the problem gives me. One says, one number has a 4 in the 10th place. Okay, so let me look at this first number. The 10th place is right here, so I'll put a 4 in it. Next it says it has a 7, that same number has a 7 in the 1000th place. Well, this is the 1000th place. I'm going to put a 7 there. Now we're going to talk about the other number. The other number has a 1 in the ones place. This is the ones place of the other number. And a 2 in the 100th place. This is the 100th place of the other number. So now, what I need to do is figure out what goes here, 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 and here to get these numbers. And once I do, these two numbers here will be what I'm looking for, because it's saying what are the two numbers? Well, it's these two numbers. I just need to figure out the missing digits. I hope that's helpful.